way we want to go. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Let's talk about books. I'm so excited. I'm Mrs. Meschter. I'm the librarian at Chinook. And we're going to talk about great gifts for readers. So bookish gifts. So they could be books, they could not be books. It depends on how our conversation goes. So welcome, and let's have a little conversation.
Hi, I'm Miss SL from Sylvester, and I have a feeling books are going to come up because we can't have a conversation without talking about books. But
that is totally fair. Yeah, I'm Miss Gunn. I'm the librarian at Highline, and I was actually asking my partner in the car last night, like, "Hey, we're going to have this conversation about like bookish gifts. Like, what do you think?" He's like, "Well, why not just books?" I was like, "Okay, that's fair."
I was talking about this with my partner, and he's like, you cannot wave your magic librarian wand and give everybody the same book. And I was like, oh yeah. So that's why bookish gifts, because we might deviate.
That's totally fair. I have a thing that was my first thing that came to mind, partly because it's things that I like that I realized I don't give other people, but I gift to myself because I think I am probably the biggest book nerd that I know. So I personally love book-related apparel. So like t-shirts or socks. Do you have one right now, Miss SL?
I have my Velocireader t-shirt on from Out of Print, which is my go-to bookish shirt and socks. And you can even get the little like zipper bags, pencil cases.
Yep. Yeah, Out of Print is my total go-to. I gave my partner for Christmas a couple years ago Very Hungry Caterpillar socks. They're awesome. And I have gifted myself a couple things from there. And I got my library assistant a mug that looks like a date dues card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, and that goes with what I was thinking also, which is fandom gear, because book nerds love talking about their fandoms and the people that they love. So like Funko Pops related to whatever fantasy that they're obsessed with, or whatever manga they're obsessed with, or like I've seen cute mini backpacks. Like I think it's when people, like as a receiver, if you know that people took the time to know this person geeks out about that, and then you receive something about that, like it feels very special.
Absolutely. Have you guys seen, I've gifted and received the book related candles. I got one that was from, because you know I'm obsessed with the Raven Boys. It was a Gansey scented candle, and he's always chewing like the peppermint leaves. So it had a little peppermint smell, but you can get them based on characters from books, or you can get ones that are just like old library or new book, and they're ridiculous and I love them.
I got the old library one once and I loved it, but it had a scent in it that I was allergic to, so it made me sneeze.
Oh no. Okay, so maybe check with your recipient first to find out if they have any sensitivities.
So lovely. I was like, oh.
That actually reminds me that this is not a smell thing, but the old library phrases made me think of it. My brother and his family sent me a few years ago a stuffed bookworm.
Fun.
So actually part of like a science stuffies themed. Like they sent my sister the like it's like Ebola or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the one that they sent me is like this yellow plush bookworm, which is kind of gross because you don't actually want bookworms in your book. But as a yellow plush toy with little like white like chewy things was pretty funny.
That's awesome. Now, is that from and we are not promoting any companies. Sure. It's just certain names come to mind, like Funko and Out of Print. What is it? The Unemployed Philosophers Guild. They do so many fun, funky things, and I wasn't sure if they did the plushies that were the. I know they do like the Shakespearean insult mugs.
Okay, I actually don't know where this one came from. Yeah,
I have an Unemployed Philosophers Guild stuffed Frida Kahlo.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have a finger puppet Virginia Woolf.
See?
And she's forever walking towards water and I have to drag her away. That's terrible. terrible.
So beyond, like, what books would you recommend for a reader?
Okay, so that is the hardest question. I had a colleague actually just recently, last week, say, "Oh, my nephew or grandkid or some person that I don't know, like, is 14. What would you recommend for them?" And I was like, I don't know, because I don't know them, right? Like, I think
Right.
that's the hardest part, right? Is
Mhm.
I feel like part of recommending a good book for a reader is like knowing them a little bit. So
Right.
either that's like students that we have, or if like I always give books to my nephews, right, for Christmas.
Right.
But like I've known them their whole lives, so I feel like that's a little easier thing. So
Right.
I think that's a tough question for like a broad audience.
Yep.
But do you have
Miss
ideas?
Miss Gunn, that is my go-to gift to all my nieces and nephews, and I have a lot. Every Christmas they get a book, and I take great pride in trying to figure out what, their age and what they liked and what they've liked in the past. And then I always slip a little gift card for someplace inside, because I also know that it's a really nerdy gift to give, and sometimes, I mean, most of them are teenagers now. They want to buy their own thing. So
Mhm.
but yeah, it is difficult. And like, and then you get into, someone will say, well, they like manga. And it's like, well, what kind of manga, because there's a big difference between. So I love giving omnibus editions of manga if I can find
Mm.
out what they're into, because then it's like giving them the whole collection, or at least the best bits at once. So
Mhm.
like, I have an older nephew. I think he was either high school or just getting into college, and he likes sort of like dark humor. And I gave him like the omnibus of Dr. McNinja.
Oh yeah.
But that's very different than, like giving one of my, middle school age nieces the collection of or a couple of Kami-sama Kiss or Fruits Basket, because they're much more romantic and lighter.
Well, I was thinking, even if you don't know details about a reader, there are so many brand new, like the newest book in the series comes out in November. Like there's a lot that come out in November. So if you
Mhm.
know that you're into a series, like getting them the newest in the series is always like a hit. So like Diver Be Kid just came out in the beginning of November.
Right. And like the last one in the Trials of Apollo
Mhm.
series just came out.
Yep.
And am I the only one counting down the last one in the Ember and the Ashes
Oh, I
series?
got it on my doorstep this morning.
Ah, jealous,
No, you're not.
Right.
jealous,
No,
because I'm hoping I get it for Christmas.
we all just geek out about these series that we love, right?
Well, I
Such a
think
good
that,
series.
my books are also good for writers, right?
Yeah.
Or artists. So my sister-in-law, we were touching base on like what her kids are into right now, because they live a ways, so I don't get to see them regularly. But her oldest has really gotten into writing, especially during virtual school. It's something that is bringing him some joy.
Right.
So it made me think of, there's a book called Guy Writes
Oh
that's
yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
nice the guys who are getting into writing. So we decided to get that for him, along with like a nice writer's journal to like have
Mhm.
a place to sort of capture ideas.
That's
Right.
lovely.
And my first job was at a comic book store, and a lot of the folks who came in and read comics were also artists. So thinking about like graphic novels and comics, not just from the story standpoint, but like the art style that maybe would appeal to somebody.
Mhm.
Right. And that's why I always take the time to figure out what students like, or when I'm asked for recommendations, because when a student tells me that they like manga, we need to know more details, right? Like
We
there's so much.
do.
And it's hard to recommend. I'm like, is it the artist? Is it the style? Is it the story? Because I can go from all the different angles, but
Well, that's kind of our, like book talk in the stacks go to, right? Is like,
Mhm.
what do you like? And sometimes you get a genre, but then you realize that, if you say adventure, there are multiple different kinds of adventure. But then sometimes you'll get a specific book, and it'll be like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And then you have to ask the follow-up questions like, do you like it because of the visuals? Do you like it because of the humor? Do you
Mhm.
like it because of the age of Greg, because you're similar in some way? So yeah, it's like, what do you like about it? And then you find some people who haven't found their book yet or their book home.
Mhm,
And so I started asking about movies and television shows, because
mhm.
story is story.
It really is.
Yeah,
If you don't
absolutely.
know, do you have any books that you fall back on that you recommend if you don't know the reader? Like when you are given the 14-year-old boy, do you have a set of books or authors that you just generically recommend?
I do have some that I fall back on in the sense of, um, especially if it's a student who says, like, I don't like to read.
Mhm.
There's a few things that, like, over the years, folks who have said, I don't like to read, but then, like, this was the one book that they liked, right? So one of those for me is Touching Spirit Bear
Oh, yeah.
by Ben McCalison, I think is his
Mhm.
last name, which weirdly enough, I have actually never read, but I have had so many boys in particular over the last 12 years say, like, this is the one book that I've read that I've liked. So it's one that if I have somebody who's kind of falling into that
Mhm.
realm,
Mhm.
because I think there's some action to it and there's some like struggle for the main character. And yeah, it has a lot of those kind of go-to elements.
That's interesting because one of mine for boys is The Compound
Mm.
by Bodine,
Yes.
because you have to be made of stone not to be curious about what's behind the yellow door. I mean, first of all, I think it's very relatable in that we may not be part of the family of a rich computer genius who's slightly unstable and paranoid and built, excuse me, this elaborate compound, but we can all imagine him, right? And then, to be in that situation where you get into the compound because you've been told there's some sort of disaster and your twin is outside of the compound. I just don't know how you cannot compulsively read to the end to find out what's going on. That's me.
It's true.
What
I
about
am a 14-year-old boy. I don't know. That's my inner child.
How about you?
If I know that a person likes good story and nonfiction, I recommend Steve Sheinken. Like generally one that I'm like, it's a compelling story. Like he takes historical event, makes it like a compulsive thing. So like my 13-year-old nephew, like I'm like, oh, Steve Sheinken, like he keeps my nephew reading. So I like him.
See, I appreciate that because I often fall short with nonfiction. So that's the other thing is I love that I have people I work with who are readers, and then I can, Miss Gunn, I can do what your coworker did to you and say, what do I give my, you know,
I always
13-year-old?
I always used to do that when my nephews were younger. So I was like, I don't know elementary age books and what's appropriate. So I'd shoot off an email to a few of our colleagues and be like, help, I have a kid who likes this.
I
So
mean, I still do, but it's when you're immersed with middle grade and YA books that like you just know titles a little bit differently. Are there any books that you would generically recommend to maybe not just boys?
And The Compound I wouldn't recommend to just boys. I'm just saying that's
Mm.
the one that comes to mind. But because it's just so exciting.
I have a
Wow.
couple go-to authors for girls, although I feel like I'm running into a little bit of a stereotype here in that both of these lend itself more towards romance, which is not necessarily what girls want either. Um, but Sarah Dessen
Oh
is
yeah.
an author that I've had girls like for years, and it's usually her books deal with like coming of age story, a girl sort of like finding her voice.
Mhm.
Right.
Um,
And realistic
world.
fiction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
realistic fiction. Often there is an element of romance to them, but that's not necessarily the like crux of the story. But for like full on romance, Perfect Chemistry by Simone Eccles.
Yes.
Another one that's been a top seller for my students for years now.
And I mean, it's a little older and it's a little gritty too,
Yeah, it's
which
definitely more for high school. But yeah, like the sort of star-crossed relationships to people who like shouldn't like each other but do, and people don't want them to, and all that kind of stuff. So
which are the best kinds of romances sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Or all the tropes. I love all the tropes, like, enemies to friends to more kind of.
That's why they exist. Like we all like them. And it's like it's such an escape. I don't know. Also, books I like to give as gifts are a little bit more, I can't say this word right now, gifts, escapist. Like I think I get a little bit more like take me away in a good book type books. Like, but yeah, in terms of ones that I just kind of whip out, like when asked, when put on the spot for good books for middle schoolers, I always feel a little bit stunned. I'm like, I don't know how to answer. And then I start thinking through, I'm like, oh yeah, this is one that I recommend. Like, honestly, if they haven't read Percy Jackson, I'd recommend that for middle school. And there's a whole universe that people can go into from there.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's also, kind of, sometimes it's where you are as a reader. Like speaking of escapists, Ms. Meschter, I love fantasy, and I do sometimes lean heavily towards romantic fantasy. And I know you and I have bonded over the Raven Boys. We've bonded over Laini Taylor, Strange the Dreamer. Perfection. Also has beautiful writing. So if you have a writer, you give them a book that's written very well, because that's a way to learn. But I also like try to think of sometimes, like, you mentioned Percy Jackson, like read-alikes, like, Harry Potter. There are a lot of people who still are very drawn to that, but they've done it. And I don't know if any of you have read, and it's sometimes kind of considered more elementary, but I think it's good for anyone. Have you read the Morrigan Crow books? Oh, because Morrigan Crow, it's I'm trying to remember the author's name. She's an Australian author, but the main character is Morrigan Crow, and she gets taken to a different reality because all her life she's been told she's cursed, and someone comes to help her, and she's taken to this different reality, and she has to attend these classes. It's very Hogwartsy, but it's a young woman, and two, it's less, like heroic and more like, is she cursed? Is she good? Is she bad? What's her destiny? And it's kind of a mixed bag. I really like it. Plus there's this crazy talking cat-like character who just I love.
I might need to check this one out for my 4th grader. So it sounds great.
It's so fun.
We are running out of time. Any final good thoughts? Because I can happily just talk to you all day.
Yeah, I will say there's one other book that I thought of that I do recommend a lot, that I have also given as a gift a lot, and that's Wonder.
Oh yeah,
by Arthur Palacio. And I love that book for so many reasons, but I also think it's a book that runs the gamut. It's great for elementary age kids. It's great for middle school and high school kids. It's great for adults. It's just lovely, and everybody should read it.
That is my magic librarian book. Like, if I could wave my wand, that's my book.
Yep. That's a wonderful book. And it makes me think of another category, which is movies or books that have been made into movies. Because sometimes if you find out someone loved a particular movie, then you can get them the book, and it gives them so much of a deeper experience with the story.
For sure.
That is for sure. All right. Well, thank you for chatting. We'll have to do this another time with another topic, and have a great afternoon.
And a great holiday.
A great holiday.
Take care, everybody.